The morning sun cast long shadows across the private quarters of Clarence House as King Charles III carefully opened an ancient mahogany chest. Inside, nestled between layers of silk tissue paper, lay objects that would seem utterly ordinary to most people. Yet these 10 items represent the deepest connections to his past, present, and the legacy he hopes to leave behind. Charles Edward Arthur George Windsor had always been a man of deep sentiment, though the public rarely saw this side of him. While cameras captured his official duties and ceremonial obligations, they never glimpsed the private moments when he would retreat to his study and quietly examine these treasures. Each object told a story that shaped the man who would become king, and each carried emotional weight that no amount of royal protocol could diminish. The first item he reached for was a small, worn teddy bear with one missing button eye. Theodore, as young Charles had named him, had been his constant companion during the lonely nights at Gordonstown School. While other boys his age were forming friendships and sharing dormitory adventures, the future king found comfort in this simple stuffed animal that never judged, never betrayed confidences, and never reminded him of his royal obligations. The bear's fur had faded from rich golden brown to a pale cream color, and his left arm hung slightly loose from decades of embracing. Charles remembered the night he nearly lost Theodore during a particularly difficult term at school. He had searched frantically through his dormitory, tears streaming down his face, until a kind maintenance worker found the bear wedged behind a radiator. That moment taught him something profound about attachment and loss that would influence his relationships for the rest of his life. Beside Theodore lay a leather-bound journal with pages yellowed by time and filled with the careful handwriting of a young prince learning to express his thoughts. Charles had started keeping this diary at age 12, initially at the suggestion of his tutor who believed writing would help him process the complex emotions that came with his unique position in life. The early entries revealed a sensitive child struggling with the weight of expectation and the isolation that royal birth inevitably brought. One particular entry, dated 3 months after his 13th birthday, read, "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be ordinary. To walk into a shop without everyone staring, or to fail a test without it becoming news. But, then, I remember what Granny told me about duty, and I try to be grateful instead." This journal became his confidant during adolescence, a safe space where he could admit fears and doubts that he dare not voice aloud. The third treasure was perhaps the most surprising, a simple ceramic mug with a chip on the handle and the words "World's Best Dad" painted in fading blue letters. This had been a Father's Day gift from Prince William when he was only 8 years old, created during an art class at his preparatory school. Charles treasured it not for its monetary value, which was essentially nothing, but for what it represented about his relationship with his eldest son. He remembered the morning William presented it to him, wrapped clumsily in newspaper and secured with far too much tape. The little prince had been so excited that he could barely contain himself, bouncing from foot to foot as his father unwrapped the gift. "I made it myself, Papa," William had announced proudly. "The teacher said we could paint anything we wanted, and I wanted you to know you're the best daddy in the whole world." That moment crystallized something important for Charles about the difference between being a royal father and simply being a father. Despite the demands of his position, despite the protocols and the public scrutiny, his children saw him first and foremost as their dad. This mug served as a daily reminder of that precious relationship, and he had used it for his morning tea almost every day since receiving it, much to the consternation of palace staff who worried about its deteriorating condition. The fourth item was a handwritten letter from his grandmother, the Queen Mother, dated just weeks before her death in 2002. The envelope bore her distinctive lavender scent, a fragrance that even now, decades later, could transport Charles back to childhood afternoons spent in her garden at Clarence House. The letter itself was written in her elegant script, each word carefully chosen to convey both her love and her wisdom. "My dearest Charles," it began, "as I write these words, I am reminded of the conversation we had in the Rose Garden last summer about the nature of kingship. You worried then, as you have always worried, about whether you would prove worthy of the crown that awaits you. Let me tell you something that I learned from your grandfather: worthiness is not inherited with the throne. It is earned through service, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to putting the needs of others before your own." The letter continued for 3 pages, offering guidance about everything from handling public criticism to maintaining personal relationships under the scrutiny of the press. But it was the final paragraph that Charles found most meaningful. "Remember, my darling boy, that being king does not mean being perfect. It means being human enough to understand the struggles of your people, and strong enough to carry their hopes. You have both qualities in abundance, though you may not always see them in yourself." Charles had read this letter countless times during difficult periods of his life. When his marriage to Diana fell apart under public scrutiny, when he faced criticism for his environmental advocacy, when he doubted his readiness for the throne, he would return to his grandmother's words and find the strength to continue. The fifth treasure was a small silver compass that his father, Prince Philip, had given him during a particularly challenging sailing expedition when Charles was 16. The North Sea had been rough that day, and the young prince had struggled with seasickness and self-doubt as he tried to navigate their small yacht through increasingly difficult conditions. Philip, never one for emotional speeches, had simply handed him the compass and said, "A good captain always knows which direction he's heading, even when the waters are rough." The compass itself was nothing special, a standard maritime instrument that could be purchased at any nautical supply store. But the lesson it represented had guided Charles through every major decision of his life. When he chose to speak out about climate change despite political pressure to remain silent, when he decided to marry Camilla despite public opposition, when he wrestled with questions about modernizing the monarchy, he would hold this compass and remember his father's words about staying true to his chosen direction. Each of these 5 treasures occupied a special place in Charles's heart and in his private chambers. They were arranged on a simple wooden shelf that he had installed himself, much to the horror of palace decorators who felt such humble objects were inappropriate for royal quarters. But Charles insisted they remain visible, tangible reminders of the relationships and experiences that had shaped him into the man he had become. The staff at his various residences had learned over the years to treat these objects with the same reverence they showed to priceless artwork and ancient artifacts. More than one housekeeping employee had been gently but firmly instructed never to move or clean these items without the king's explicit permission. They were not mere possessions but extensions of his identity, physical manifestations of the emotional connections that kept him grounded despite the extraordinary circumstances of his birth and position. As Charles carefully returned each item to its proper place on this particular morning, he reflected on how these simple objects had sustained him through more than 7 decades of life in the public eye. They represented different aspects of his character: the vulnerable child who needed comfort, the thoughtful young man seeking to understand his place in the world, the devoted father cherishing his children's love, the grandson grateful for wisdom freely given, and the son learning life's most important lessons through experience rather than instruction. In a world where every aspect of his life was scrutinized, photographed, and analyzed, these 10 treasures remained purely his own. They connected him to moments of authentic human emotion that existed outside the constraints of royal protocol. They reminded him that beneath the titles and ceremonial duties, he remained fundamentally human, with the same needs for love, guidance, and connection that motivated people everywhere. The significance of these objects would only grow with time, as Charles faced the immense responsibility of following in his mother's footsteps as monarch. Queen Elizabeth II had reigned for 70 years, setting a standard of service and dedication that seemed almost impossible to match. In moments of doubt about his ability to fill that role, Charles would turn to these treasures for reassurance and strength. These possessions also represented his commitment to continuity and tradition, values that would define his reign as king. Just as he had preserved these meaningful objects from his past, he intended to preserve and protect the institutions and customs that had served Britain well for centuries. Yet they also symbolized his understanding that tradition must be balanced with adaptation, that even the most cherished customs must evolve to remain relevant in changing times. The story of these treasures was really the story of Charles himself, complex, deeply feeling, sometimes misunderstood, but always committed to the responsibilities that fate and birth had placed upon his shoulders. They would remain with him throughout his reign, silent witnesses to the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead, tangible links to the experiences that had prepared him for the crown he now wore. The 6th treasure that King Charles guarded so carefully was a collection of pressed flowers arranged in a slim leather portfolio, each specimen carefully labeled in his own young handwriting. These botanical samples dated back to his earliest childhood walks through the gardens at Balmoral, when his governess would encourage him to observe and collect examples of Scottish wildflowers. The portfolio contained over 50 varieties, from simple daisies picked at age 5 to more exotic specimens he had discovered during teenage hiking expeditions in the Highlands. Each pressed flower represented not just a moment in time, but a lesson in patience and observation that would serve him well throughout his life. His governess, Miss Catherine Peebles, whom he called Miss Pye, had taught him that understanding nature required careful attention to detail and respect for living things. She would watch with approval as young Charles spent hours examining the delicate petals and intricate structures of each flower before pressing them between sheets of blotting paper and heavy books. The creation of this botanical collection had been one of his favorite childhood activities, providing a peaceful escape from the more formal aspects of his education. While other lessons focused on languages, history, and mathematics, his time in the garden studying plants felt like pure freedom. He could move at his own pace, make discoveries based on his own curiosity, and create something beautiful that belonged entirely to him. One particularly meaningful specimen in the collection was a tiny white heather flower, pressed when he was 12 years old during a solitary walk following a difficult conversation with his father about his future responsibilities. Prince Philip had been characteristically direct in explaining the sacrifices that would be required of Charles as heir to the throne, and the young prince had felt overwhelmed by the weight of expectation. Finding the white heather, traditionally considered a symbol of good luck in Scotland, had seemed like a small sign that everything would work out as it should. The portfolio also contained flowers from significant locations and events throughout his youth. There were roses from the gardens at Highgrove House, which would later become one of his most beloved residences. Wild violets from the grounds of Gordonstown School marked happier moments during his challenging years there. Lavender from his grandmother's garden at Clarence House captured afternoons spent listening to her stories about the family's history and the responsibilities that came with royal birth. The seventh treasure was even more personal, a wooden toy soldier that his mother had given him for his 6th birthday, hand-carved by a craftsman in the Welsh valleys. The soldier was dressed in the uniform of the Welsh Guards, painted in meticulous detail with bright red tunic and black bearskin hat. Unlike the mass-produced toys that filled the palace nurseries, this single figure had been created specifically for Charles, incorporating symbols and details that reflected his future role as Prince of Wales. The craftsman who made the soldier was a war veteran who had served in the Welsh Guards during World War II, and he had included subtle touches that reflected his military experience and Welsh heritage. The soldier's pose was not the typical rigid stance of ceremonial figures, but the alert, ready position of a guardsman on active duty. Tiny Celtic symbols were carved into the base, and the regimental badge was painted with extraordinary precision despite its minute size. Charles had treasured this toy soldier above all his other playthings, creating elaborate adventures and scenarios that often reflected his growing understanding of duty and service. The soldier became the hero of countless imaginary battles, always fighting for justice and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Through these childhood games, Charles began to develop his own understanding of what it meant to serve others, concepts that would later influence his approach to royal duties and charitable work. The soldier had accompanied Charles through many of the significant transitions of his childhood. It sat on his bedside table at Buckingham Palace, traveled with him to Balmoral for summer holidays, and even made the journey to Gordonstown where it provided comfort during homesick nights. Other students occasionally teased him about keeping a toy soldier at his age, but Charles refused to put it away, understanding instinctively that some connections to childhood should be preserved regardless of others' opinions. The eighth treasure was a photograph album containing images that would never appear in any official royal collection or public exhibition. These were candid family moments captured during holidays, informal gatherings, and quiet evenings at home. The album had been a Christmas gift from his sister Princess Anne when he turned 21, and she had spent months secretly gathering photographs from various family members and household staff to create this unique record of their shared childhood. The photographs revealed a side of royal life that few people ever saw: Charles and his siblings building sandcastles on the beach at Holkham, having snowball fights in the grounds of Sandringham, and participating in family picnics where protocol was temporarily set aside in favor of simple enjoyment. One particularly cherished image showed Charles at age 8, chocolate cake smeared across his face after enthusiastically celebrating Prince Andrew's first birthday, his formal composure completely abandoned in a moment of genuine joy. Another photograph captured him at 14, standing proudly beside his first successful attempt at drystone wall building during a summer spent learning traditional crafts from the estate workers at Balmoral. His clothes were dirty, his hands scraped from handling rough stones, but his expression showed pure satisfaction at mastering a skill that connected him to generations of Scottish craftsmen. This image perfectly encapsulated his lifelong belief that understanding traditional skills and crafts was essential for anyone who hoped to lead and serve effectively. The album also contains several photographs of Charles with his grandmother, the Queen Mother, during their private moments together. One showed them working side by side in her garden, both wearing old clothes and gardening gloves, completely absorbed in planting bulbs for the spring display. Another captured them during a fishing expedition, both laughing at some shared joke while sitting beside a highland stream. These images revealed the special relationship that had provided Charles with some of his happiest childhood memories and most valuable life lessons. The ninth treasure was perhaps the most unexpected: a simple brass button from his first naval uniform, carefully preserved in a small velvet-lined box. This button had been cut from his jacket following his graduation from the Royal Naval College Dartmouth, not because the uniform was damaged, but because Charles wanted to keep a tangible reminder of one of the proudest moments of his young life. His naval training had been voluntary, though strongly encouraged by his father, who believed military service was essential preparation for future kingship. Charles had approached the challenge with determination, knowing that he would receive no special treatment and would be expected to meet the same standards as every other cadet. The physical demands, strict discipline, and emphasis on teamwork had initially seemed overwhelming, but gradually he discovered reserves of strength and capability he had not known he possessed. The button represented months of rigorous training, early morning inspections, navigation exercises, and the gradual development of leadership skills that would serve him throughout his life. More importantly, it symbolized his first real experience of being judged purely on merit rather than birth. His instructors cared nothing for his royal status, they evaluated him solely on his ability to master seamanship, follow orders, and eventually command respect from fellow servicemen. During his naval service, Charles had earned the genuine respect of his shipmates through competence and dedication rather than inherited privilege. This experience taught him that true authority came from proven ability and character rather than titles or position. The lessons learned during those months at sea influenced every subsequent decision he made about leadership and public service. The 10th and final treasure was a small leather-bound notebook containing handwritten recipes for traditional British dishes, compiled during his teenage years when he first became interested in cooking and domestic skills. This interest had developed despite, or perhaps because of, his privileged upbringing where such skills were typically handled by household staff. Charles had convinced the palace chefs to teach him basic cooking techniques during school holidays, arguing that understanding how households functioned was essential knowledge for someone who would one day be responsible for the nation. The notebook contained detailed instructions for making everything from proper Yorkshire pudding to traditional Christmas pudding, each recipe carefully tested and annotated with his own observations about ingredients and techniques. Some entries included variations he had developed himself, such as a version of shepherd's pie that incorporated vegetables from the palace gardens and herbs he had grown in his own small plot at Highgrove. These recipes represented much more than culinary curiosity. They reflected Charles's deep belief that understanding traditional skills and crafts was essential for maintaining cultural continuity. He saw cooking as a link to previous generations, a way of preserving knowledge and customs that might otherwise be lost in an increasingly modernized world. His interest in traditional food preparation also connected to his growing environmental awareness and belief in sustainable agriculture and local food production. The notebook also contained recipes he had learned from various household staff over the years, carefully credited to their original creators. There were Scottish shortbread recipes from cooks at Balmoral, Welsh cakes from staff at Wynie Wormwood, and regional specialties from all corners of Britain. Charles had made a point of learning about local food traditions wherever his duties took him, seeing this knowledge as a way of better understanding and connecting with the communities he served. Each of these 10 treasures told a story about different aspects of Charles's character and development. Together, they created a comprehensive picture of a man shaped by deep family relationships, traditional values, personal interests, and a profound sense of duty to others. They revealed someone who valued continuity and tradition while remaining curious about the world around him, someone who understood that leadership required both formal authority and personal authenticity. The preservation of these objects also demonstrated Charles's belief in the importance of maintaining connections to the past while adapting to present circumstances. Just as he had carefully maintained these childhood treasures, he would approach his role as king with respect for inherited traditions combined with willingness to evolve and modernize where necessary for the institution to remain relevant and effective. These treasures would continue to provide comfort and guidance throughout his reign, reminding him of the experiences and relationships that had prepared him for the extraordinary responsibility of serving as constitutional monarch. They connected him to his authentic self beneath the formal requirements of kingship, ensuring that he would never lose sight of the human experiences and emotions that made him capable of understanding and serving his subjects effectively. While the first 5 treasures revealed the foundational experiences that shaped Charles's character, the remaining 5 possessions told an equally compelling story about his evolution from uncertain young man to confident leader. Each item reflected different stages of personal growth and the gradual development of the qualities that would make him an effective monarch. The pressed flower collection represented more than childhood curiosity about nature. It revealed the beginning of his lifelong commitment to environmental stewardship that would become one of the defining characteristics of his public service. Even as a young child, Charles had demonstrated an intuitive understanding that human well-being depended on maintaining healthy relationships with the natural world. This early botanical interest would eventually evolve into pioneering work on sustainable agriculture, climate change awareness, and conservation efforts that influenced policy and public opinion long before environmental issues became mainstream concerns. His governess had unknowingly planted seeds of environmental consciousness during those early garden walks when she taught him to observe seasonal changes, identify different species, and understand the interconnected relationships between plants, insects, and soil. These lessons about patience, careful observation, and respect for living systems would later inform his approach to everything from organic farming at Highgrove to his advocacy for traditional building techniques that worked in harmony with local environments rather than against them. The pressed flowers also represented his ability to find beauty and meaning in simple, everyday experiences. While other members of the royal family might focus on grand gestures and formal ceremonies, Charles consistently demonstrated appreciation for modest pleasures and quiet moments of reflection. This quality would serve him well as king, helping him connect with ordinary citizens who valued similar simple joys in their own lives. The Welsh Guard toy soldier revealed the early development of Charles's understanding of duty and service, concepts that would become central to his identity throughout his life. The imaginative games he created around this figure helped him process complex ideas about leadership, sacrifice, and responsibility at an age when such concepts might otherwise have seemed abstract or overwhelming. Through play, he began to internalize the notion that true leadership required putting others' needs before his own comfort or convenience. The soldier also represented his connection to Wales, a relationship that would become increasingly important throughout his life. His investiture as Prince of Wales in 1969 had been a formative experience, introducing him to Welsh language, culture, and history while also exposing him to the complexities of national identity within the United Kingdom. The toy soldier served as a tangible reminder of this connection, inspiring him to learn Welsh and develop genuine appreciation for Welsh traditions and achievements. More broadly, the carved soldiers symbolized Charles's respect for traditional craftsmanship and his belief in supporting skilled artisans who preserved ancient techniques. Throughout his adult life, he would champion traditional building methods, textile production, and other crafts that maintained links to historical knowledge while providing employment for contemporary practitioners. This commitment to traditional skills reflected his understanding that cultural continuity required active preservation efforts rather than passive nostalgia. The photograph album created by Princess Anne represented the importance of family relationships in providing stability and joy throughout Charles's life. Despite the challenges that came with royal birth and the inevitable tensions that arose from living constantly in the public eye, these images captured moments when the family functioned simply as a family, sharing experiences and creating memories that had nothing to do with duty or obligation. The photographs also documented Charles's relationship with his siblings, particularly Anne, who had always been direct and honest in her dealings with him. Their shared childhood experiences created bonds that survived the pressures and complications of adult life, providing mutual support during difficult periods. Anne's decision to create this album demonstrated her understanding of Charles's sentimental nature and his need for tangible reminders of happier times. These family images served another important purpose. They reminded Charles that beneath all the protocol and ceremony, the royal family remained fundamentally human. The children in these photographs experienced the same emotions, challenges, and joys as children everywhere, even if their circumstances were unique. This awareness would help him maintain perspective during his own reign, remembering that his role as king existed to serve the people, not the other way around. The naval uniform button represented a crucial turning point in Charles's development, marking his transition from sheltered prince to capable young man who had earned respect through merit rather than inheritance. His naval service provided the first opportunity to test himself against standards that applied equally to everyone, regardless of background or birth. This experience taught him that genuine confidence came from proven competence rather than inherited privilege. The button also symbolized his connection to a long tradition of royal naval service that included his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. Each had served with distinction, learning lessons about leadership, teamwork, and service that could not be taught in any classroom or palace corridor. By following this tradition, Charles demonstrated respect for the experiences that had shaped previous generations while also proving his own worthiness to continue the family legacy. Naval training had also exposed Charles to different types of people and perspectives than he would normally encounter within royal circles. Serving alongside young men from various backgrounds broadened his understanding of contemporary British society and helped him develop empathy for the challenges faced by people whose lives were very different from his own. This broader perspective would prove invaluable throughout his public service career. The recipe notebook revealed Charles's practical approach to understanding the world around him and his belief that hands-on experience was essential for effective leadership. His interest in cooking reflected a desire to understand how ordinary households functioned, what challenges families faced in providing nutritious meals, and how food traditions connected communities to their cultural heritage. The notebook also demonstrated his commitment to preserving traditional knowledge and skills that might otherwise disappear in an increasingly modernized world. By learning and recording these recipes, Charles was participating in cultural preservation efforts that he would later champion through organizations like the Prince's Trust and his various environmental initiatives. His culinary interests connected to broader concerns about sustainable agriculture, local food production, and the environmental impact of modern farming methods. The notebook contained not just recipes but observations about seasonal ingredients, traditional preservation methods, and the importance of supporting local producers. These interests would eventually lead to his pioneering work in organic farming and his efforts to promote sustainable food systems. Each of these treasures contributed to Charles's development as someone who understood that effective leadership required both emotional intelligence and practical competence. The pressed flowers taught him patience and observation skills. The toy soldier helped him process concepts of duty and service. The photograph album provided emotional grounding through family connections. The navel button represented proven capability and earned respect. The recipe notebook demonstrated practical wisdom and cultural awareness. Together, these possessions revealed someone who had learned to balance tradition with innovation, duty with personal authenticity, and formal responsibility with genuine human connection. They showed a man who understood that being king meant serving others rather than being served, and who had spent decades preparing for this responsibility through both formal education and personal experience. The care with which Charles preserved these objects also reflected his understanding of the importance of continuity in maintaining stable institutions. Just as he had maintained connections to his own past through these treasures, he would approach his reign with respect for historical precedents while remaining open to necessary changes and adaptations. These 10 treasures would continue to provide guidance and comfort throughout the challenges and triumphs of his kingship. They connected him to the experiences and relationships that had shaped his character, ensuring that he would never lose sight of the human values that made effective leadership possible. They reminded him that beneath the formal requirements of monarchy lay fundamental human needs for love, purpose, and authentic connection with others. The story of these possessions was ultimately the story of someone who had learned to find meaning and purpose in both grand gestures and simple moments, who understood that true nobility came from service rather than privilege, and who had spent a lifetime preparing to use his unique position to benefit others rather than himself. They represented the foundation upon which he would build his reign as king, drawing on decades of experience, reflection, and growth to serve his people with wisdom, compassion, and genuine understanding of their needs and aspirations. In preserving these treasures, Charles had preserved the essential elements of his identity that would enable him to fulfill his role as constitutional monarch while remaining true to the values and relationships that had made him the man he had become. They were not just possessions but embodiments of the experiences that had prepared him for the extraordinary responsibility of serving as head of state for the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. Beyond their individual significance, these 10 treasures served a deeper psychological purpose for King Charles, providing anchors of authenticity in a life shaped by extraordinary circumstances and constant public scrutiny. Each object represented a different aspect of his identity that existed independent of his royal status, reminding him that beneath the titles and ceremonial obligations, he remained fundamentally human with the same emotional needs and desires as anyone else. The preservation of these items also reflected Charles's sophisticated understanding of the relationship between personal identity and public duty. Throughout his life, he had witnessed the challenges faced by other members of the royal family when the demands of their positions overwhelmed their personal needs and authentic selves. He had seen how isolation and pressure could lead to personal struggles that ultimately affected their ability to serve effectively. By maintaining these connections to his authentic experiences and relationships, Charles had developed strategies for preserving his essential self while fulfilling the extraordinary requirements of royal service. The treasures provided what psychologists might call identity anchors, tangible reminders of who he was beyond his formal role, ensuring that he would never completely lose himself in the demands of kingship. The teddy bear Theodore represented his ongoing need for comfort and emotional security, needs that did not disappear simply because he wore a crown. Throughout his life, Charles had faced periods of intense stress, public criticism, and personal uncertainty that would challenge anyone's emotional resilience. Having Theodore nearby provided a discreet source of comfort that connected him to the unconditional acceptance he had experienced as a child. The emotional significance of this simple stuffed animal extended beyond personal comfort to represent Charles's understanding that vulnerability was not weakness but an essential component of effective leadership. A leader who could not acknowledge his own emotional needs would struggle to understand and respond to the needs of others. Theodore reminded him that maintaining emotional honesty and accessibility was crucial for genuine connection with the people he served. The diary from his adolescence served as a record of his intellectual and emotional development, documenting his journey toward understanding his unique position and responsibilities. Reading his own words from decades past helped Charles maintain perspective during difficult periods, reminding him of challenges he had already overcome and growth he had achieved through previous struggles. The diary also provided insights into patterns of thought and emotion that had shaped his approach to leadership and public service. By reviewing his younger self's concerns and observations, he could better understand his own motivations and decision-making processes, leading to more thoughtful and consistent choices throughout his reign. More importantly, the diary represented his commitment to self-reflection and continuous learning. Throughout his life, Charles had demonstrated willingness to examine his own actions and attitudes, seeking opportunities for growth and improvement. This quality would prove essential for effective kingship, as the role required constant adaptation to changing circumstances and evolving public expectations. The ceramic mug from Prince William represented the enduring power of family relationships to provide meaning and motivation even in the most challenging circumstances. No matter how difficult his public duties became or how harsh the criticism he faced, Charles could look at this simple gift and remember that his children saw him first as their father, not as a royal figure. This perspective had profound implications for his approach to kingship. Understanding that his most important relationships existed independent of his royal status helped him maintain humility and authentic connection with others. He could never allow the formal requirements of monarchy to completely overshadow the basic human needs for love, acceptance, and genuine relationship. The mug also reminded him of his responsibility to the next generation, both within his own family and throughout the nation. Every decision he made as king would affect the world his children and grandchildren would inherit. This awareness influenced his approach to long-term planning and his commitment to addressing challenges like climate change that might not be fully resolved during his own lifetime. The letter from his grandmother provided ongoing guidance from someone who had understood both the challenges and opportunities of royal life. The Queen Mother's words offered perspective that could only come from decades of experience navigating the complex relationship between personal desires and public duty. Her advice helped Charles understand that effective monarchy required balancing tradition with adaptation, maintaining dignity while remaining accessible. The letter also represented the importance of mentorship and wisdom passed between generations. Charles had been fortunate to receive guidance from family members who had faced similar challenges and could offer practical advice based on their own experiences. This understanding of the value of mentorship influenced his own relationships with younger members of the royal family and his commitment to supporting their development. The compass from his father symbolized the importance of maintaining clear direction and consistent values even when facing difficult decisions or uncertain circumstances. Throughout his life, Charles had encountered situations where popular opinion, political pressure, or personal preference conflicted with what he believed was right. The compass reminded him that effective leadership required staying true to core principles even when doing so was difficult or unpopular. This lesson proved particularly relevant during his environmental advocacy, when he spoke out about climate change and sustainable development long before these issues gained widespread public support. The compass reminded him that true leadership sometimes meant accepting short-term criticism in service of long-term benefits for society. The botanical specimens represented his connection to the natural world that had provided both solace and inspiration throughout his life. Working with plants and understanding natural systems had taught him patience, observation skills, and appreciation for the interconnected relationships that sustained all life. These lessons informed his approach to leadership, helping him understand that effective governance required similar patience and attention to complex relationships between different groups and interests. The pressed flowers also symbolized his commitment to preserving beauty and knowledge for future generations. Just as he had carefully maintained these delicate specimens, he approached his role as king with awareness that he was a temporary custodian of institutions and traditions that must be preserved and protected for those who would come after him. The Welsh Guard soldier connected him to concepts of duty and service that transcended personal comfort or convenience. The games he had created around this figure had helped him develop an early understanding that true nobility came from serving others rather than being served. This perspective would define his approach to kingship, emphasizing service and sacrifice rather than privilege and personal benefit. The photograph album preserved evidence of family relationships that provided emotional support and grounding throughout his life. These images reminded him that despite the extraordinary circumstances of royal birth, he had experienced genuine love, laughter, and connection with people who valued him for himself rather than his position. The navel button represented his commitment to earning respect through competence and dedication rather than relying solely on inherited authority. This experience had taught him that genuine leadership required proven capability and consistent character, lessons that would guide his approach to every aspect of royal duty. The recipe notebook demonstrated his belief in the importance of understanding practical skills and traditional knowledge. This hands-on approach to learning reflected his conviction that effective leadership required genuine understanding of how ordinary people lived and worked. Together, these 10 treasures created a comprehensive support system that would enable Charles to maintain his essential humanity while fulfilling the extraordinary demands of kingship. They provided emotional grounding, practical wisdom, and spiritual connection that would sustain him through the challenges and opportunities of his reign. Each treasure also represented a different aspect of the legacy he hoped to leave behind: environmental stewardship, family devotion, intellectual curiosity, practical wisdom, and unwavering service to others. By preserving these objects and the values they represented, Charles was ensuring that his reign would be guided by principles developed through decades of experience, reflection, and growth. The treasures would continue to evolve in significance throughout his kingship, gaining new layers of meaning as he faced fresh challenges and opportunities. They would remind him of where he had come from while inspiring him toward the future he hoped to create for his people and his family. As King Charles III settled into his reign, these 10 treasured possessions took on new significance, serving not just as personal mementos but as guideposts for the kind of monarch he intended to be. Each object had prepared him for different aspects of kingship, and together they formed the invisible foundation upon which he would build his legacy as sovereign. The transformation from heir apparent to reigning monarch brought with it unprecedented responsibilities and challenges that would test every lesson these treasures had taught him. The early months of his reign were marked by intense scrutiny as the public, media, and political establishment evaluated his readiness for the role he had waited 74 years to assume. During these crucial initial months, Charles found himself returning repeatedly to these 10 objects, drawing strength and guidance from the experiences they represented. The teddy bear Theodore reminded him that vulnerability and compassion were strengths rather than weaknesses in a leader. As king, Charles made conscious efforts to show genuine emotion and empathy in his public appearances, breaking from the more reserved approach that had characterized previous monarchs. When he visited communities affected by natural disasters or economic hardship, he allowed his genuine concern to show, often surprising people with his authentic emotional responses to their struggles. This approach initially drew criticism from traditionalists who felt the monarchy should maintain greater emotional distance from current events. However, Charles understood that modern leadership required authentic human connection rather than remote dignity. Theodore had taught him that accepting comfort and offering comfort were natural human behaviors that made relationships stronger rather than weaker. The childhood diary continued to provide perspective during moments of doubt or uncertainty about major decisions. When faced with complex constitutional questions or politically sensitive situations, Charles would often reflect on his younger self's observations about duty, service, and the balance between personal desires and public responsibility. The diary reminded him that growth came through facing challenges honestly rather than avoiding them. One particularly relevant passage he revisited frequently was written during his university years: "I am beginning to understand that being royal is not about being better than other people, but about being willing to serve them regardless of personal cost." This insight guided his approach to every aspect of kingship, from ceremonial duties to policy discussions with government ministers. The ceramic mug from William remained on his desk throughout his early years as king, serving as a daily reminder of what mattered most in his life. Despite the enormous pressures of his new role, Charles made deliberate efforts to maintain close relationships with his children and grandchildren. He scheduled regular private time with family members, protecting these moments from official intrusions whenever possible. The mug also influenced his approach to public engagement, particularly his interactions with young people. Having experienced fatherhood himself, Charles understood the concerns and hopes that parents throughout the nation felt for their children's futures. This perspective informed his advocacy for education, youth employment programs, and environmental protection measures that would benefit future generations. During public appearances, Charles often spoke directly to children and young adults, asking about their interests, concerns, and aspirations. These interactions felt natural and genuine because they drew upon his authentic experience as a father and grandfather. The mug reminded him that behind every young person he met was a family that loved them just as much as he loved his own children. The letter from his grandmother became even more precious as Charles faced the unique challenges of following Queen Elizabeth II's remarkable 70-year reign. The Queen Mother's wisdom about balancing tradition with necessary change provided a framework for approaching modernization efforts within the monarchy. Her words about earning worthiness through service rather than inheriting it motivated Charles to prove himself worthy of the crown through his actions as king. The letter particularly influenced his approach to constitutional questions and his relationship with elected officials. The Queen Mother had emphasized the importance of remaining above political partisanship while still providing stable leadership during times of uncertainty. Charles used this guidance to navigate complex situations where the monarchy's traditional neutrality was tested by divisive political issues. Her advice about maintaining dignity while remaining accessible also shaped his public appearances and communication style. Charles worked to strike a balance between respecting the formal traditions of monarchy and connecting genuinely with contemporary audiences who expected more informal and direct communication from their leaders. The compass from his father proved invaluable during his first major constitutional crisis as king, when a political deadlock threatened to undermine governmental stability. The compass reminded him that effective leadership sometimes required taking unpopular but necessary positions to serve the greater good. Drawing on Prince Philip's lesson about staying true to his chosen direction, Charles provided steady guidance that helped resolve the crisis while maintaining appropriate constitutional boundaries. The compass also influenced his approach to long-term planning and policy advocacy. Rather than focusing primarily on short-term popular approval, Charles committed to supporting initiatives that would benefit the nation over decades, even if they were not immediately popular. His environmental advocacy continued with renewed vigor, supported by his understanding that climate change required sustained action regardless of political cycles or public opinion fluctuations. The botanical collection inspired Charles to make environmental stewardship a defining characteristic of his reign. Within months of becoming king, he announced ambitious sustainability initiatives for royal estates, expanded support for conservation programs, and used his platform to promote environmental awareness on a global scale. The pressed flowers reminded him that small, careful actions could preserve beauty and knowledge for future generations. His early speeches as king frequently referenced the lessons he had learned from observing natural systems and cycles. He spoke about patience, interconnectedness, and the importance of working with natural processes rather than against them. These themes resonated with audiences who were increasingly concerned about environmental degradation and climate change. The botanical specimens also influenced his approach to diplomatic relationships, particularly with Commonwealth nations where environmental issues were urgent concerns. Charles used state visits and official meetings to promote international cooperation on conservation and sustainable development, drawing on decades of personal study and advocacy to speak knowledgeably about complex environmental challenges. The Welsh Guard soldier continued to symbolize his commitment to service above self, a principle that guided every aspect of his kingship. Charles made clear from the beginning of his reign that he viewed the crown as a tool for serving others rather than a privilege to be enjoyed. His daily schedule reflected this commitment, packed with public engagements, charitable activities, and meetings focused on addressing social challenges. The toy soldier also reminded him of his special connection to Wales and the importance of understanding and celebrating the diverse cultures within the United Kingdom. Charles made frequent visits to Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, demonstrating respect for their distinct identities while promoting unity and cooperation throughout the kingdom. The photograph album influenced his approach to family representation within the monarchy, ensuring that other family members had opportunities to contribute meaningfully to royal duties while maintaining their own authentic identities. Charles understood that the monarchy's future depended on younger generations finding fulfilling roles within the institution, and he worked to create opportunities that matched their interests and abilities with national needs. The naval uniform button continued to remind him that respect must be earned through competence and character rather than demanded based on position alone. As king, Charles made efforts to demonstrate genuine expertise in the issues he championed, studying thoroughly before speaking publicly and seeking advice from recognized authorities in relevant fields. This commitment to competence influenced his selection of causes to support and organizations to patronize. Rather than spreading his attention thinly across many different areas, Charles focused on issues where he could make genuine contributions based on his knowledge and experience. The recipe notebook inspired Charles to maintain connections with traditional skills and cultural practices throughout Britain. He used royal patronage to support craftspeople, traditional food producers, and cultural organizations that preserved important knowledge and practices. The notebook reminded him that cultural continuity required active support rather than passive appreciation. As king, Charles expanded programs that connected young people with traditional crafts and skills, understanding that cultural preservation required transmission of knowledge between generations. He also promoted local food production and sustainable agriculture, drawing on his own experiences learning traditional cooking methods. Together, these 10 treasures provided the foundation for a reign characterized by authentic leadership, genuine service, and deep commitment to the well-being of his subjects. They ensured that King Charles III would approach his extraordinary responsibilities with humility, wisdom, and unwavering dedication to the common good. The treasures also represented his understanding that effective monarchy in the 21st century required balancing respect for tradition with responsiveness to contemporary needs. By preserving these connections to his authentic self and formative experiences, Charles was able to lead with both authority and humanity, serving as a bridge between Britain's proud history and its promising future. Each object would continue to provide guidance and inspiration throughout his reign, reminding him of the experiences and relationships that had prepared him for the crown while inspiring him to use his unique position to create positive change for his people and the world. They were not just possessions but embodiments of the values and commitments that would define his legacy as king. The story of these treasures ultimately revealed that true nobility came not from birth or ceremony but from character, service, and genuine care for others. King Charles III had spent decades learning these lessons, and his reign would demonstrate their enduring power to inspire effective leadership and meaningful service to humanity.